Happy Islamophobia month, everyone. Oh, sorry, it's Islamophobia Awareness Month. We should be aware of Islamophobia, not Islamophobic. I'm sure you'll get your time every other month of the year, because it turns out there's good reason to have a very rational skepticism of Islam, particularly in Britain, which we'll be going through. But let's start with this. Has anyone else noticed this has come out of absolutely nowhere? Like, what other year has November been Islamophobia Awareness Month? Pretty weird how it's just completely sprung up out of the AstroTurf.
It's almost like there's been some sort of event that has happened that might make people more inclined to push this sort of thing.
Yeah, I couldn't possibly speculate as to what that was, because nobody wants to be held in contempt of court. But this is the Mayor of West Yorkshire saying, "This Islamophobia Awareness Month, and every month there is no room for hate in West Yorkshire." Remember, West Yorkshire, because we're going to get onto that in a bit. I urge anyone who's been a victim of a hate crime to report it to the police. You will be heard and you will be believed. Now, the problem is that non-crime hate incidents in this country don't actually require any evidence to designate the person that's making the anonymous accusation a victim, and so the person who is accused, by dint of being accused, is held as guilty, and the police are promoted to record these so that they can climb up the ranks of the anti-racist hierarchy within the police, because everything they do is to not be called racist. So this entire country is premised on thought crimes on behalf of Muslims who seek to log thought crimes in order to accrue more power and wealth to their respective grievance groups, and the police just go along with it because they want to get promotions.
And the way she's worded it there does sound insidious, doesn't it? In a sense, I know that word can get you a hate crime these days, but you will be heard and you will be believed. So there's no mention of you will have a fair hearing and evidence will be heard. It's just, if it is reported, it must be true, and therefore you will be guilty.
Yeah, it turns out if you're a young white girl in West Yorkshire who has been subjected to hate crime by Muslims, you won't be believed. But bookmark that for a moment. So where's this Islamophobia Awareness Month campaign come from? Well, it's these guys, the Islamophobia Awareness Month Seeds of Change organisation. They offer Islamophobia awareness training as part of DEI qualifications. I was actually listening in on a safeguarding workshop on female genital mutilation recently with a family member having to go through this for school reasons. And these kinds of people that form these curricula bent everything out of shape. So, for example, they said that you shouldn't racially profile girls from the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa as being more likely to be victims of FGM. And did you know that actually FGM happens more often in Christian countries, so it's not just a Muslim thing?
What?
More often in Christian countries committed by what population in those countries?
Don't ask that question. Also, don't ask the question that it's only in Christian countries this sort of thing gets recorded as a crime, because in Muslim countries it's not a crime. This is why in the UK we are the world capital of acid attacks, because when it sort of honour-based violence happens in Muslim countries, it's not recorded because it's not a crime.
I actually saw a graphic showing the Middle East and North Africa, and I'm not sure how true it was because I wasn't able to find the original data source, but it indicated that up to 70% of women in Egypt, of all places, underwent this, which suggests that it's massively large scale.
It's pretty harrowing. Obviously, as well, if he's referring to a Christian country, he's referring to a place like Nigeria, where half of the country is under the control of Boko Haram. Not the most devout Catholic sect in the world. There you go. But as was mentioned, I'm sure this is a purely organic movement, hasn't been given any money by the Home Office or Raiku to manage hostilities towards Muslims that may or may not have been sprung up in this year for completely unrelated reasons to a certain crime. But there you go. I don't say that sort of thing lightly as well, because they do get taxpayer funding, and they are supported by the police, the WWF, the NHS, churches, universities, Islington Council, and Tesco in Birmingham Yardley. So wonderful. Jess Phillips can do her local shop knowing that they're fighting Islamophobia. What reason would there possibly be to be Islamophobic in Britain? Can we think of any reasons?
A series of terror attacks.
That would
mass
be
rape of British girls.
There's one actually. There's a good one we can get onto.
I mean, if you're talking about West Yorkshire in particular.
Yeah, we're going to. So a little while ago, this was with, I believe, Roaring Nationalist and Carl, I covered the grooming gang trial in Rotherham that only Charlie Peters of GB News and one local journalist went down and covered, and this was to do with the sentencing of, I believe, 7 men for the sexual abuse of over 100 girls over the span of about a decade. No other local or national news outlet thought it worthy of reporting on this. The BBC, constantly committed to stories of minoritarian grievance, didn't think the industrial-scale child rape committed in towns and cities across the UK warranted a mention. Charlie Peters highlighted this in a piece that he's written for The Critic. He's written up his coverage of the trial here, as I covered in the YouTube segment, which did rather well. Aside from us, J.K. Rowling on X and GB News, literally nobody covered this. He also notes in here that he covered the changing of the Wikipedia page on grooming gangs to the grooming gangs moral panic.
That was ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah, that Harry and I was on the panel at the time did a segment on as well. So yeah, again, there's very few outlets willing to cover this, and it's because it seems to indict the government's preferred immigration policy, which is bringing in unparalleled numbers of hostile foreign diasporas, inflicting them on the native population, and then anytime the native population notices that certain communities might commit more crimes and do heinous things to young girls, they're called far-right racists and told to shut up and not look back in anger. Unfortunately, there's an update to this story. So this is the reason why I'm presenting this in Islamophobia Awareness Month. They're getting their sentences reduced. Yeah. So, responsible for hundreds of child rapes, and
After an error. Like,
So-
oh, sorry, we realised that that's actually legal now.
yeah, so this is Abid Sadiq, convicted of 3 counts of rape and 1 of indecent assault, and Mohammed Siab was convicted of 2 counts of rape, 1 of sexual intercourse with a girl under 13, and 1 count of trafficking. If I remember rightly, Siab was the one who had to have an interpreter, because despite living in the country for about 10 years, doesn't speak a lick of English. They had 3 years and a year taken off their sentences, respectively. So the details are as follows in this GB News article. It was following an administrative error. Mr. Justice Slater, I suppose everyone should look into Mr. Justice Slater's case history to see if he's got a record of giving offenders like this leniency, as lots of the judges seem to do in this country. He resentenced both men at Sheffield Crown Court. Sadiq's sentence was reduced by 3 years to 21 years, consisting of 20 years imprisonment plus 12 months extended licence, and Siab was resentenced to 24 years imprisonment with 1 year taken off his jail term. Despite the reduced sentences, GB News understands that both men could spend further time behind bars, as they will now have to face a parole board due to the nature of their offending. Previously, they were liable for automatic release after serving 2/3 of their sentences, or the parole board could just let them out, as they often do, so they could be out even earlier, turns out. Yeah.
It's so depressing, isn't it?
Yes.
Just letting these people out to continue abusing people because they've not been sufficiently punished. And I mean, let's not get into what I think sufficient punishment is, but please do carry on.
Yeah, we the sort of punishment we gave out before the 1960s would be a wise and fitting thing here, I think.
Yeah, short drop and sudden stop, right?
It's British tradition, and rope is cheap. Anyway, so last time I mentioned at the trial, families were crying out during the sentences, saying, "I love you, Dad." They were absolutely shocked when their father received jail time. So, I mean, we do know that there's sort of a conspiracy of silence among these Pakistani ethnic enclaves, of where lots of people know that brothers, cousins, friends, fathers and sons will go and pass the same young, vulnerable girls around. So the idea that nobody knew anything about this beggars belief. But then at the resentencing, one survivor said a relative of one of these men was, quote, dead eyeing her in the court, staring her down. GB News understands the judge then ordered the relatives to leave the court because they were trying to intimidate one of the survivors. And then it continued outside Sheffield Crown Court. It's alleged that one of the relatives called on another to slap the bitch, referring to one of the survivors. There was then an altercation during which the NCA officers and the court security separated the groups. One of the survivors told GB News the relative's behaviour was disgusting and an insult. Siab and Sadiq were cruel and appalling rapists. They stole my childhood. Their relatives should have some shame, but instead they're trying to fight me at the court. The real insult, though, came from the court to slap me. It's beyond unacceptable. It is revolting. Now, do you remember in 2017 when Tommy Robinson stood outside a sentencing hearing, could not have interfered with the sentencing, was just reading a BBC article, and was found guilty of contempt of court for that? How are these families not the same?
Because they're brown and they're Muslim.
Unfortunately. New Shadow Justice Secretary, former, unfortunately unsuccessful Tory leadership candidate, which we'll be talking about shortly, Robert Jenrick, said grooming gang rapists should be locked up for life. If they're foreign nationals, they should be immediately deported. It really is that simple. One of the survivors actually requested that 2 of the men who are Pakistani nationals be deported, and she was censored by the judge in her witness statement for making that recommendation. So they really don't want you to know that it's a complete option to have these people in the country. Same week this happened, there's another one. 20 men jailed for a combined total of 219 years after a series of grooming gang trials. Remember when they call it a moral panic on Wikipedia, or when they say that there's a conspiracy theory about grooming gangs on that dreadful Hope Not Hate documentary, they're just blatantly lying to you. Here's some details from the West Yorkshire Police. 20 men faced 219 years behind bars after being convicted of sexually exploiting 4 girls between the ages of 12 and 16 in Calderdale, West Yorkshire.
So what's that, like an average of about 11 years?
Each, yeah.
Also, I saw this when it was published, and you've got that guy Craig Mitchell, just the one Anglo-sounding name there amongst a sea of Pakistani names and faces. I don't really understand how that happens, because I've got no reason to necessarily believe this, but I have suspicions that perhaps this is included in amongst that case, maybe a tangential relationship to them, because the Pakistanis are known to be very insular in their community. They stick to their own. That's true.
Well, there's that, or he was running it like a prostitution ring, and so they were willing to rent out these young girls to paedophiles of any description.
That makes sense, I suppose, yeah.
Which is just despicable, but I'll go into the details shortly, but West Yorkshire. There's no room for hate or Islamophobia in West Yorkshire. There is room for hundreds of foreign paedophiles of the Islamic faith in West Yorkshire, though, it turns out, because it's taken absolutely ages to find and prosecute and report on these people. They've had loads of reporting restrictions placed on this case for years. I think it's the case first opened about 10 years ago. The trials first started in October 2021. Absolutely no reporting restrictions on all the people locked up for the Southport riots and protests, though, because one is politically convenient to the Labour government, the other one certainly is not. So
you can also see here, 3 of them have got the same surname, so there's got to be some sort of familial aspect to it, unless it's it's just a common surname and it's a coincidence.
There's usually let's just say community and family relations in this culture are not a Venn diagram, it's often a circle. Mm-hmm. So there you go. So this, again, can't be reported on for absolute years, but anyone involved in the Southport massacre could be dragged through the mud. Got it. So the first investigation regarded the sexual exploitation of 2 girls between 13 and 16, which happened in 2006 and 2009 in Calderdale, West Yorkshire. 9 men from Halifax were jailed following 2 trials at Bradford Crown Court. Men from Halifax. Okay, sure. Trial started in October 2021. That's Shahzad Nawaz, Halifax name, and Nadeem Nasir were sentenced to 11 years for being guilty of rape and making threats to kill. Sajid Adalat was sentenced to 7 years for rape. Shahzad Nazir was sentenced to 11 years for rape. And Sohail Zafar was sentenced to 42 months for rape and possession of Class A drugs. What's 42 months? That's not even 4 years, is it? Why has he got less than 4 years? Anyone want to offer a reason as to why these people haven't gotten life in prison for abusing children?
They're a regime client group, and therefore they need them on side.
Yeah, quite. There was a second trial. Nadeem Adalat was sentenced to 14 years for rape. After he attempted to appeal the sentence, it was raised to 16 years. Asad Mahmoud was sentenced to 13 years. Mohammed Rizwan was sentenced to 9 years. And Vasim Adalat was sentenced to 12 years. He also attempted an appeal, but his sentence was increased to 14 years and 6 months. The article makes sure to stress that all the men were from Halifax. All men from Halifax. Sure. West Yorkshire Police then launched another investigation in the same year after the force received reports of the repeated sexual abuse of a 13-year-old girl between 2002 and 2006. There were then 3 trials related to the investigation. The first trial in August 2022, Amir Shaban found guilty of rape and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The second trial in October 2022, Mohammed Zirab, Imran Raja Yassin, and Kamran Amin all jailed for 10 years for rape. Mohammed Akhtar was jailed for 11 years and has since died in prison. Malik Qadir was found guilty of 5 counts and sentenced to 22 years. And then the third trial at Bradford Crown Court in January 24, Haroon Sadiq sentenced to 10 years for 2 counts. Shafiq Ali Rafiq sentenced to 12 years for 2 counts. And Sar Rafaz Rabnawazameh, I don't care about getting it right, frankly. He was imprisoned for 9 years. The third investigation found Craig Mitchell guilty of rape in December 2018 and sentenced him to 12 years. Right, so we found one. We found one who is not an imported foreign criminal, and therefore don't be Islamophobic.
Well, the Home Office can write up a report about him saying, see, not all.
Yep.
That's what I was getting at earlier. Like, it seems strange, doesn't it? He's alongside it. Not saying he's not guilty of... He probably is, right? But it's obviously going to be pointed at, and people are going to be saying, well, look, it's not a Pakistani community problem, despite all of those other people.
Yeah, what people fail to understand is that exceptions prove rules. It's that if you find an outlier, it means that generally the stated rule does apply. So when people say, oh, it's just a conspiracy theory that these grooming gangs are operating for ethnic, racial and religious reasons, because there's one white guy in them, it's like, okay, what about the 19 other Pakistani Muslims that are running this? Mm-hmm. Anything? No, because it's inconvenient to your narrative. The article also notes that the task force, which Charlie Peters' documentary helped set up under then Home Secretary Suella Braverman, that started last year, has already made over 500 arrests, and it's identified a fair few thousand victims. But you should expect more, to finish on, because this is something that I've spoken about on my show before, but the Labour Party are trying to do a Gaza family visa scheme that's trying to replicate the Ukrainian refugee scheme.
Go to hell.
So this would bring over prospective thousands. I mean, the Ukrainian scheme, last I checked, had over 225,000 people into this country. They just import people en masse from Palestine. Now, I don't know if any of you guys are history buffs, but the Palestinians might have a bit of an axe to grind against Britain for helping establish the State of Israel. And so, even if you're not Jewish, which none of us at the table are, I don't want an imported foreign diaspora that hates me because of my ethnicity, my heritage, my religion and my race being dropped into this country at my expense and then to go on and abuse more young girls. Thank you very much.
Well, remember the distinction. When they're in Palestine, they are all Hamas collaborators, useful idiots, human shields, bad people who need to be taken off of the map. The second that they cross over into Europe, they are beautiful souls, innocents, they're in danger. And
as British as you and me.
Yeah.
This is the dichotomy that Harrison Pitt says, Churchill abroad and Chamberlain at home. It's where you have to be incredibly aggressive outside of your borders, but then to all of those countries that you want to bomb into democracy and denigrate as violating human rights, you completely ignore that they might hold a grudge against you, and then you immediately appease them when they become a hostile ethnic bloc when you bring them into your country. So you're aggressive abroad and appeasement at home, and we wonder why this has resulted in lots of grooming gangs. And as I said, I mentioned this on my show a little while ago, which you can have a look at, but Labour were always honest about this, because the Shadow Immigration Secretary at a debate before even the election was announced just said, we're drawing up plans for this and we want to institute it. So happy Islamophobia Awareness Month. I hope you're now aware of why some people are Islamophobic.
What were the odds? How could this convergence have come together? But of course, this is something that Bo has a complete passion for, and he must have done about 10 hours worth of Caesar so far, and you can watch it all for just £5 a month. Also, come and follow us on X, formerly Twitter, and be updated about everything that we're doing and keep abreast of current developments. Thanks for watching, folks. We'll see you soon.